The Winter Palace in St. Petersburg stood as the grand residence of the Romanov Dynasty, the rulers of Imperial Russia. Within its opulent halls, generations of emperors and their wives held power over one of the vastest empires on earth. Since the reign of Catherine the Great, most empresses who walked these corridors were of German birth. Among them was the young Prussian princess named Charlotte von Preussen, daughter of Queen Louise of Prussia. Raised in the refined world of Charlottenburg Palace in Berlin, Charlotte was betrothed to Grand Duke Nicholas of Russia at the age of 17. 2 years later, in the summer of 1817, she departed for St. Petersburg to become his bride, leaving behind her homeland forever. More than a century later, another Prussian woman followed her path, Maria von Preussen, a distant descendant of Princess Charlotte. Driven by curiosity and bloodline, Maria journeyed to Russia to uncover the truth behind her ancestors' fate. She sought to understand what awaited Charlotte at the imperial court and what it truly meant for a young woman to be sent away into a distant, unfamiliar empire as part of a royal alliance.
Maria von Preussen carried with her the writings of Charlotte, fragments of letters and diary pages once penned by the young bride. Within those faded lines lay the emotions of a woman torn between duty and longing, between the glitter of the Russian throne and the memories of her Prussian home. In her own words, Charlotte confessed that everything around her felt utterly unfamiliar. Her spirit was more overwhelmed than her eyes, and her thoughts were tangled in confusion. The journey from Berlin to St. Petersburg stretched nearly 1,500 kilometers, a grueling voyage of 17 days by horse-drawn carriage. One of the most important stops along the way was the town of Memel, the final German settlement before the border of the Russian Empire. Today it is known as Klaipėda in Lithuania. It was here, in the summer of 1817, that Charlotte met Grand Duke Nicholas for the first time in person. From this point onward, they would continue together toward St. Petersburg, bride and groom, bound by duty and affection. Memel already held deep memories for Charlotte. As a child of 8, she had fled there with her family, escaping Napoleon's advancing army after his conquest of Prussia. For a time, it seemed they might never return to Berlin. Their safety had been secured only by the intervention of Tsar Alexander, the ruler of Russia and a steadfast ally of the Prussian royal family. Nicholas, his younger brother, had also been present at the peace negotiations that followed. Since the era of Peter the Great, the Russian court had often turned to the small German states Prussia, Württemberg, Hesse, and others in search of brides for its princes. The strategy served both faith and politics. German princesses, being Protestant, were generally willing to embrace the Orthodox faith, and their marriages strengthened Russia's cultural and diplomatic ties to the very heart of Europe. Yet, in this case, beyond the politics of dynasties, something genuine took root. The young Prussian princess and the Russian Grand Duke grew to love one another, a rare union of duty and affection, sealed at the very border where Charlotte bid her homeland farewell. In the year 1817, the small border town of Nimesat on the Baltic coast held deep symbolic meaning. Only a few miles east of Memel, it marked the precise line where the realms of Prussia and Russia met. It was there that Grand Duke Nicholas awaited Charlotte's arrival, the place where her life as a Prussian princess would end and her destiny as a future empress of Russia would begin. The departure was a moment of ceremony and emotion. The Berlin Court Gazette sent its reporters to witness the farewell of the young bride. Soldiers lined the road in full-dress uniform, their cheers of hurrah echoing through the air. Charlotte, moved to tears, walked slowly along the ranks, greeting each regiment and pausing often to dry her eyes. At the border barrier, she turned one last time to gaze back at the land of her birth. Beyond the crossing stood Nicholas, ready to receive her. When Charlotte stepped across into Russian soil, he embraced her warmly, and the Russian troops erupted in a jubilant roar. It was a moment that bound two empires through one woman's sacrifice and one man's promise. Today, little remains of that once vital frontier between the great powers of Europe. Long ago, this was a border that symbolized more than geography. It was where the worlds of the West and East touched and diverged. Two stone obelisks once stood here, marking the threshold between the Kingdom of Prussia and the vast Russian Empire.
Charlotte later wrote that Nicholas's presence gave her the courage to cross the border on foot. She wanted to bid farewell properly to the Prussian troops who had accompanied her so far. On one side, she was sent off by the familiar shouts of Prussian soldiers. On the other, she was welcomed by the cries of Russian regiments. The sudden shift between two worlds overwhelmed her. For a moment, she nearly lost her composure, unsure how she managed to stand upright as emotions threatened to overtake her. The realization that every face from now on would be strange and unfamiliar brought her to tears. The young German bride entered a land of striking contrasts. In St. Petersburg, the aristocracy lived in magnificent luxury palaces adorned with marble and gold, halls glittering with chandeliers, and servants numbering in the thousands. The nobles wore diamonds on their coats and buttons, shining brighter than any court in Europe. Yet beyond this dazzling surface lay a nation of hardship and inequality. Nearly 4/5 of the population lived as serfs, bound to estates and trapped in deep poverty. For Charlotte and other foreign princesses, Russia was a realm of splendor and sorrow, a golden facade studded with jewels, behind which simmered unrest, despair, and the weight of a people long denied freedom.
At that time, St. Petersburg was the beating heart of the Russian Empire, a city carved out of swampland by Peter the Great in 1703. It was built as a gateway to the West, a symbol of ambition, and a fortress of power on the Baltic Sea. When Charlotte arrived in the summer of 1817, she found a city in full bloom. Ballet and theatre thrived. Academies of science and engineering matched the finest in Europe. Musicians, writers, and architects from across the continent flocked to its glittering salons and grand palaces. Each residence seemed more opulent than the last, a vision of imperial glory that both dazzled and intimidated the young princess.
German women who came to St. Petersburg were admired for their discipline, refinement, and sense of duty. They were praised as loyal wives and devoted mothers, qualities the Russian court valued deeply. Yet for all their elegance and education, their greatest test came in a single moment: conversion to the Orthodox faith. For Charlotte, this transformation was both external and spiritual. The ceremony required her to renounce her Protestant beliefs and even her own name. From that day, she was no longer Charlotte von Preussen, but Alexandra Fyodorovna. It was a symbolic rebirth, a step from one world into another, from daughter of Prussia to Grand Duchess of Russia. Meanwhile, Maria von Preussen made her own way to the Winter Palace, following the same path her ancestor once took. She reflected on how terrifying such a journey must have been 2 centuries earlier. The young women who left their familiar German homes knew the dangers that awaited them: court intrigues, political rivalries, and a history of rulers who met violent ends. Still, they crossed into a foreign land, guided by duty and fate, to become part of a dynasty whose wealth and power could shape the course of Europe. For the 18-year-old bride, the full weight of her destiny became clear on the fourth day after her arrival, when she stood in the grand chapel of the palace, ready to surrender her past and take her place among the Romanovs. Charlotte later recalled that the priest who instructed her in the teachings of the Orthodox faith was a brave and patient man, though his poor command of German left her feeling isolated during her lessons. He could not offer the comfort or understanding she so desperately needed. In those moments of uncertainty, she turned inward, seeking strength through prayer. Immersed in scripture, she found a calm beyond words and prepared herself to meet this turning point with quiet resolve. On the day of her first communion, Charlotte was led to the palace chapel by Nicholas himself. Surrounded by flickering candles and thick clouds of incense, she described the experience as feeling like a sacrificial lamb, aware that she was surrendering not just her faith, but her entire former self. In accepting this transformation, she gave up her past, her homeland, and even her name, for a new life that now belonged to Russia, to Nicholas, and to the people she would serve as their Grand Duchess. The ceremony stretched for hours. The weight of the embroidered gown and the stifling air of the crowded chapel pressed down on her, yet she endured. When it was over, the Protestant princess had become the Orthodox Grand Duchess Alexandra Fyodorovna. Weeks later, in the warmth of July 1817, the long-awaited wedding took place. Charlotte wrote that she awoke that morning with her heart too full for words. A crown heavy with jewels was placed upon her head until she thought it might crush her. Yet when she joined hands with Nicholas before the altar, all fear vanished. She entrusted her life entirely to him, and in her words, he never once betrayed that trust.
The union of Nicholas and Charlotte, now Alexandra, became one of the rare true love stories within the long and often tragic history of the Romanov dynasty. Their marriage was not only stable but deeply affectionate. They shared a similar upbringing, shaped by discipline, devotion, and military pride. Alexandra accepted Nicholas's nature completely, his obsession with parades, uniforms, and the rigid order of an army life, because it mirrored the values of her own Prussian family. Their bond was built on admiration, respect, and an understanding that transcended duty. With her new title as Grand Duchess, Alexandra joined the inner circle of the Romanov family. Her husband Nicholas was the younger brother of Tsar Alexander, who at that time still ruled the empire. Alexander himself was married to another German princess, Elizabeth, born Louise Marie Augusta of Baden, who had been brought to St. Petersburg as a child and married at 14. Their union was marked by sorrow, as both their daughters died young. The matriarch of the family, Maria Fyodorovna, mother to Alexander and Nicholas, was originally a princess of Württemberg. Known throughout the empire for her charity and grace, she represented the enduring influence of German nobility within Russian society. The precedent for these alliances had been set long before. by one of the most formidable women in Russian history, Princess Sophie Friederike August of Anhalt-Zerbst, remembered as Catherine the Great. She was the only foreign-born consort who rose to rule the empire herself, and under her reign, the policy of choosing German brides for the heirs of Russia became tradition. The appeal of these unions was clear. The German principalities, though small, offered brides of impeccable lineage and education without threatening Europe's fragile balance of power. Their Protestant backgrounds made conversion easier, and their political neutrality made them ideal partners for a vast and cautious empire. For Alexandra, the years that followed her marriage were among the happiest of her life, a time of serenity, companionship, and simple joy before the burdens of power would change her world forever. Nicholas possessed a keen fascination with the military and all things mechanical. His precision and discipline suited him perfectly for the post. His brother, Tsar Alexander, assigned him Inspector General of the Engineering Corps. It was a position of trust and responsibility, yet one that allowed Nicholas and Alexandra to enjoy the calm of newly married life. For a brief period, they lived in a world untouched by the storms of power. But beyond the peace of their domestic happiness, a quiet shift was taking place in the empire. Years of strain had worn down Tsar Alexander. Weary of rule, he confided to his brother that he wished to withdraw from political life and name Nicholas as his successor. The revelation stunned both Nicholas and Alexandra. Charlotte later wrote that when Alexander shared his intention, they were struck as if by lightning. Alexander had tried to reassure them that his abdication would not be immediate, yet the words had already changed everything. The throne, by law and tradition, was meant to pass to the next brother, Constantine. Yet Constantine had long since refused the crown, preferring a quiet life far from the court. Only a few trusted members of the royal circle knew that Nicholas, not Constantine, was now the heir. That secrecy would later lead to confusion, unrest, and bloodshed.
For the moment, however, Tsar Alexander remained on the throne, and Alexandra continued her life as Grand Duchess. Her charm and warmth soon won over St. Petersburg's aristocracy. She was admired for her sincerity and grace, and her laughter filled the grand salons of the city. 2 centuries later, Maria von Preussen walked through those same glittering halls to experience a glimpse of what her ancestor once knew. Invited to a historical salon at the Hermitage, she imagined the candle-lit elegance, the rustle of silk gowns, and the sense of awe that must have surrounded Alexandra in those early, blissful years at the Russian court.
Decades after the revolution had swept away the old nobility, St. Petersburg once again echoed with the sound of violins and laughter. Grand balls returned to its palaces, not as relics of power, but as expressions of a new generation of Russians rediscovering their lost heritage. For the descendants of aristocratic families, these gatherings were a way to reconnect with the grandeur their ancestors once knew. At one such event, the presence of a real Prussian princess, Maria von Preussen, became the highlight of the season. Her lineage tied her directly to Alexandra Fyodorovna, her great-great-grand-aunt, whose elegance and love of dance had once captivated St. Petersburg society. 6 months after giving birth to her first child in 1818, Alexandra herself had hosted her first great ball, a celebration so splendid that it became the talk of the city. Nobles praised her taste, her warmth, and her ability to make even the grandest event feel intimate.
Alexandra's life revolved around her husband, her children, and the rituals of courtly life. She was not a woman of politics, but of affection, living contentedly within her glittering, carefully ordered world. Her devotion to Nicholas bordered on reverence. To many, she seemed almost carefree, a charming figure who moved gracefully through her days, as if untouched by the heavy matters of empire.
Nicholas, for his part, embodied the image of an emperor in every sense. Tall, commanding, and strikingly handsome, he was admired as the very model of royal authority. His presence filled a room, and his confidence drew admiration and loyalty in equal measure. To Alexandra, he was the center of her universe, the man she adored without question. Yet only 8 years after their marriage, the serenity of their life was shattered. Before Tsar Alexander could fulfill his intention to abdicate in favor of Nicholas, he died unexpectedly. The sudden death of the emperor plunged the empire into uncertainty. Unaware of the secret plan of succession, the nobility and army swore allegiance to Constantine, who had long renounced his claim to the throne. What followed would shake the foundations of the Russian Empire and test Nicholas and Alexandra in ways neither could have foreseen. In December 1825, the fragile calm of the empire collapsed. As word spread of Tsar Alexander's death, uncertainty gripped St. Petersburg. Revolutionary officers within the army saw their chance to challenge autocracy and staged what would become known as the Decembrist Uprising. It was an attempt to reshape Russia before Nicholas could be formally declared emperor.
The rebellion erupted in Senate Square, directly beside the royal residence. Soldiers gathered in defiance, refusing to swear their oath of loyalty to Nicholas. For the young heir, it was a moment of peril and decision. Everything he had inherited now hung in the balance.
The origins of the revolt lay in ideas born far beyond Russia's borders. Many of the officers leading it had fought in Europe during the wars against Napoleon. There, they had witnessed societies shaped by the Enlightenment and the ideals of liberty, law, and reform. Returning home to a land still bound by serfdom and rigid hierarchy, they began to question why their own people lived in chains while others had long since broken theirs. The Decembrist movement was not a rebellion of peasants, but of nobles, educated men disillusioned by the oppression of their own class. They believed the time had come for Russia to change.
From her chambers in the Winter Palace, Alexandra watched in dread as reports arrived one after another. Messengers hurried through the corridors with news of unrest, gunfire, and confusion in the city. She knew the outcome would determine not only the fate of her husband, but the future of the empire itself.
Alexandra knew well what fate could befall a royal family in times of revolution. The memory of the French monarchy's downfall haunted her thoughts as she watched the uprising unfold outside the palace. Those who witnessed the events urged Nicholas to act swiftly, to crush the rebellion with force before it spread. Yet Nicholas remained calm, almost unnervingly so. His composure and restraint astonished those around him, though some mistook it for hesitation. Hoping to avoid bloodshed, Nicholas first sent envoys to negotiate with the rebels. But as dusk fell, tragedy struck. The envoy, an honored war hero of the Napoleonic campaigns, was shot and killed. The brief hope for peace vanished. Nicholas gave the order to open fire. Cannons thundered across Senate Square, and within hours, the revolt was over. Nearly 2,000 rebels lay dead, the snow stained red by Russian blood spilled by Russian hands. Later that night, Nicholas returned to the palace. From her window, Alexandra saw him ride into the courtyard, his uniform covered in frost and ash. When he entered the room, she ran to him and was struck by how changed he seemed. The gentle, devoted husband she had known was now hardened by duty and grief. The weight of command had transformed him into a ruler bound entirely to his role. The Decembrist revolt defined Nicholas's reign before it had even begun. Though always a devout believer in autocracy and the Orthodox faith, this crisis convinced him that his power was divinely ordained. From that day forward, he ruled with absolute conviction that only unwavering authority could preserve Russia. To escape the tension and political intrigue of the capital, Nicholas and Alexandra began spending more time at Peterhof Palace, their summer retreat on the Gulf of Finland. Built by Peter the Great as a symbol of Russia's emergence as a European power, it became for them not a monument of conquest, but a refuge, a place where the emperor and his wife could breathe, far from the noise of court and the weight of the crown. After Peter the Great defeated the Swedish forces and secured Russia's long-sought access to the Baltic Sea, he built an extraordinary palace along the Gulf of Finland, Peterhof. It stood as a shining symbol of a new, powerful and outward-looking Russia. The palace, with its cascading fountains and gilded halls, proclaimed imperial grandeur to all who approached by land or sea.
Yet for Alexandra, Peterhof's vastness felt overwhelming. The grand rooms and endless corridors seemed too distant, too formal for the warmth she longed for. As a wife and mother, she yearned for a private haven, a place untouched by ceremony or politics. Nicholas, ever attentive to her heart, understood. Throughout their life together, he found small ways to surprise her, gestures that spoke more than royal declarations ever could.
One summer afternoon, Alexandra wrote with delight about the moment she first saw their retreat. As we took the lower path from Strelna, she recalled, I could not contain my little cries of joy when the sea came into view, the old trees by the shore, the fountains sparkling in the garden. I was enchanted. On the edge of the Peterhof estate, Nicholas built a cottage modest by imperial standards, but rich in feeling. Its architecture reflected the romantic spirit of the age, blending neo-Gothic lines with the sentimental charm of the German countryside. It was a place of simplicity and peace, evoking the medieval ideals of harmony and family that both of them cherished. The cottage became their favorite refuge. Away from courtly intrigue and rigid ceremony, Nicholas and Alexandra spent their summers there with their 7 children, 4 sons and 3 daughters, living for a time almost as an ordinary family. Those years, surrounded by laughter, the sea breeze and the sound of their children's play, were the happiest of Alexandra's life.
Yet even within that haven by the sea, not every moment was filled with joy. The quiet evenings sometimes brought back the ache of separation. When Alexandra first came to Russia, everything around her, the language, the customs, even the air felt strange. She longed for the familiar sounds of Prussia, for the comfort of her family. She wrote constantly to her brother Wilhelm and to her friends back home, pouring out her heart in letters that eased the loneliness but never erased it. Still, in their cottage, the Romanovs, one of the richest and most powerful families on earth, found a rare kind of peace. Nicholas, shaped by his military upbringing, remained disciplined even in private life. Yet he was tender with his children and loved nothing more than sleeping on his old field bed rather than a royal mattress. Alexandra, frail from repeated pregnancies, found strength again in the rhythm of domestic life, walking the gardens, teaching her children, and cherishing the simplicity that power seldom allowed.
Once a year, that tranquility was briefly broken. The family opened the estate to nobles and townsfolk alike for a great summer gathering. From a polite distance, guests could watch the imperial family take tea on the terrace, an almost ordinary scene of happiness framed by gold and sea light. Centuries later, Maria von Preussen returned from Peterhof to St. Petersburg. Driving through the vast countryside, she glimpsed what her ancestors once ruled, a realm that once stretched across 1/6 of the world's land. Endless fields, small villages, and estates painted a portrait of a kingdom sustained by the labor of millions of serfs, their toil maintaining the grandeur of a privileged few. Despite the inequality, the Romanovs were known as comparatively fair landowners, and those who worked their estates often fared better than under lesser nobles. The empire itself functioned almost like a colossal family enterprise, one where German influence had been woven in from the beginning. In St. Petersburg, Maria sought the lingering spirit of that past. The city remained a crossroads of Europe and Russia, a place of culture and ambition. In the 19th century, tens of thousands of Germans had lived there, forming communities around institutions like the St. Peter's Church. They served as officers, bankers, architects, and merchants, builders of the imperial machine. Many had come, as Maria reflected, for the same reason as the princesses before them, to make their fortune, to rise above small-town lives, and to play their part in the grand story of Russia. In time, German presence became inseparable from the fabric of St. Petersburg itself. As Russian writers such as Leskov and Gogol later portrayed, there was always a German figure, a character, industrious, careful, and devoted to work, standing in contrast to the more spontaneous and fatalistic Russian temperament. It was this steadfast, practical spirit that had helped shape the city's order and elegance.
Charlotte, now Alexandra, had in fact arrived in a place far less foreign than she imagined. Her mother-in-law, Maria Fyodorovna herself, born a princess of Württemberg, was delighted to welcome another German woman into the family. The city's court and society were filled with people of German origin. By some accounts, nearly half of St. Petersburg's elite could trace their roots back to the small principalities of Central Europe. Alexandra brought with her customs from home, one of which would become beloved throughout Russia, the Christmas tree. What began as a German tradition soon spread among the aristocracy and, eventually, across the nation. As years passed, Alexandra's world narrowed to the circle of her family.
Her 7 children became her greatest joy, though her happiness was shadowed by repeated miscarriages that left her weakened. Physicians urged restraint, yet Nicholas, devoted to her, yet bound by the passions of his nature, could not always obey such counsel. In time, Alexandra faced a sorrow shared by many empresses before her. She learned to bear her husband's infidelities in silence. The grand balls she had once loved became places of quiet humiliation as Nicholas's attentions turned toward younger women of the court.
One Austrian diplomat's wife wrote of seeing the Emperor and the Duchess Yarosova together so openly that no pretense remained. "The Tsar has cast aside the veil that once concealed the affair," she noted, "and all can see it plainly." For Alexandra, proud yet gentle, the betrayal cut deep. Her heart had long sensed the truth, but she maintained her composure, preserving dignity where love had been wounded beyond repair.
Nicholas, though passionately devoted to Alexandra in his own way, followed the customs of many rulers before him. Discretion veiled his affairs. His mistresses were often women of high-rank aristocrats or even members of Alexandra's household. Such behavior, though painful, was accepted as part of the world they inhabited. For Alexandra, it was not love that failed, but the conventions of empire that demanded silence from its queens. In the Romanov dynasty, infidelity was as enduring as the throne itself, a recurring shadow cast across 3 centuries of reign. The same sorrow later touched Alexandra's daughter-in-law, Princess Marie of Hesse, who became known as Maria Alexandrovna after her marriage to Alexander, Nicholas's son. Alexandra had opposed the match, troubled by rumors that questioned Marie's legitimacy. Yet Alexander married her despite the whispers, defying his mother's wishes. Their early happiness quickly dissolved when tragedy struck. Their first child died in infancy, and grief soon gave way to distance.
Alexander's devotion faltered, replaced by a string of affairs that became the scandal of the court. As Maria's health declined from tuberculosis, she was forced to watch as her husband's mistresses were given rooms within the palace itself. Her dignity demanded silence, and she bore the humiliation with the same composure her mother-in-law once had.
Like Alexandra before her, Maria sought refuge in purpose. She devoted herself to charity and the arts, becoming a patroness of schools, hospitals, and the restoration of sacred architecture. Her husband's father, Nicholas, had once founded a mosaic workshop in Rome for Russian artists. Now, its legacy continued through the restoration of St. Isaac's Cathedral and the ornate mosaics that adorned the imperial capital. Through these acts of patronage, the empresses of the Romanov house women, bound by duty, betrayed in love, yet unbroken in spirit, ensured that art and faith outlived the frailty of men. In the imperial workshops, the traditions of art and craftsmanship continued under royal patronage. Students learned to cut and place tiny fragments of colored glass to form mosaics, an art demanding patience and precision. The instructors joked gently with visitors. "That's the hammer, be careful with your fingers." Each stroke had to be practiced over and over again until perfection became instinct. The Romanovs viewed art not merely as decoration, but as proof that Russia could rival the great academies of Europe.
The Imperial Academy of Arts flourished under this vision, with the royal family commissioning portraits and icons that preserved the faces of their loved ones for generations. With no photography at the time, each likeness required endless sittings. Alexandra, still deeply attached to her homeland, filled her rooms with portraits of her parents and siblings, small attempts to keep Prussia close even while surrounded by Russian grandeur.
Letters between Berlin and St. Petersburg crossed borders almost daily. Family visits were frequent when politics allowed. In one of her letters, Alexandra wrote of the pain she felt as her brother Wilhelm departed after a long stay. "It was a terrible moment," she confessed, "but afterward I felt even closer to Nicholas. I leaned entirely on him, and his tenderness replaced everything I had lost." For her, as for many empresses, after her family was both her anchor and her refuge. Among all the women who wore the Russian crown, only Catherine the Great ever wielded real political power. The others, though often intelligent and capable, were bound by duty, love, or tragedy to lives of quiet endurance. After Maria Alexandrovna's sorrowful reign came another foreign bride, Princess Dagmar of Denmark. Originally betrothed to Nicholas, heir to the throne, she was left grieving when he died suddenly. A year later, she married his younger brother, Alexander. When their father, Emperor Alexander II, was assassinated, she became Maria Fyodorovna, consort to Alexander III. Her grace and composure helped steady the empire during turbulent years. The last of the German princesses to sit upon the Russian throne was Alix of Hesse, who took the name Alexandra Fyodorovna upon marrying Nicholas II, the grandson of Charlotte of Prussia. Her reign, however, was marked by tragedy from the very beginning. During the coronation celebrations, a panicked crowd stampeded, leaving thousands dead. Her young son suffered from hemophilia, a secret that haunted the family and drove Alexandra into isolation. In her loneliness, she turned to the mystic Rasputin, whose influence over her and the royal household scandalized Russia. As war swept across Europe, her German origins made her the target of suspicion and hatred. When revolution erupted, the dynasty that had ruled for 3 centuries came to an end. In Yekaterinburg, Alexandra was executed alongside Nicholas, and their children a fate as cruel as it was final. Historians would later call it the ultimate tragedy of the Romanovs, that the Tsar who faced the greatest upheaval of all, Nicholas II, was also the least capable of adapting to it. Bound by pride and tradition, Nicholas and Alexandra clung to the old order while the world changed around them. Their blindness to history's tide sealed not only their own doom, but the end of an empire. In modern Russia, the age of the Tsars has taken on the glow of legend, a symbol of grandeur, strength, and cultural pride. For many, it evokes not only memories of empire, but a deep nostalgia for order and tradition. Maria von Preussen discovered this sentiment firsthand during her visit to a small school in the heart of St. Petersburg, one of the few surviving legacies of the last empress, Alexandra Fyodorovna. The school, once a modest institution for girls, had been founded by Alexandra herself shortly before the First World War. It stood as a quiet monument to her compassion, a final gesture from a woman so often misunderstood. Today, it has been restored as both an educational center and a living tribute to the ideals she once held.
Inside its bright classrooms, 110 children study each year. Alongside mathematics, languages, and history, they are taught traditional Russian crafts, lace-making, weaving, embroidery, and the art of ringing church chimes. These lessons are not merely skills, they are echoes of a heritage nearly lost in the tides of revolution and modernity.
The head teacher explained that Alexandra's vision for the school was simple but profound. We must give back to the people what we have hidden away in museums. We must teach them again, for tradition is the foundation of every nation. Girls from across the country once came here to learn these arts, before returning to their villages as teachers, carrying fragments of the old world into the new. When asked about its purpose today, one teacher put it plainly: "Our task is to keep awareness of our traditions alive. Without that, Russia would not exist." In those words, Maria recognized the enduring thread that linked past to present, the belief that identity, once lost, could be rebuilt through memory, craft, and faith. Within the walls of the school that still bears her influence, the essence of the Russian spirit remains tangible, pious, disciplined, and rooted in tradition. These are the same values upheld by Alexandra Fyodorovna, the last German-born empress, to sit upon the Russian throne before the revolution swept her family away. Her vision for faith, duty, and beauty continues quietly, even as the empire she once served has long vanished. History was rarely kind to Russia's rulers. Of the final 12 Tsars, 6 met violent deaths through assassination or revolution. Yet the fate of Nicholas I, the husband of Princess Charlotte of Prussia, was different. In 1855, an influenza epidemic tore through St. Petersburg, claiming his life within days. His death left Alexandra devastated. In her final writings, she confessed her grief with heartbreaking clarity. "He was everything to me. For 38 years, he was the center of my heart. For 38 years, I was the happiest of women, and now I am inconsolable. There is no place for me on this earth, and I long to follow him."
Bereft of purpose, Alexandra returned often to Berlin, spending long periods abroad in search of solace. She died 5 years later, her final words whispered like a farewell to the life she had shared. "Nikki, Nikki, I am coming."
Today, the story of Alexandra and Nicholas rests quietly within the Peter and Paul Cathedral in St. Petersburg, where the rulers of Russia lie entombed together. Nicholas I's in the northern aisle, and beside him, the space long reserved for his wife holds her remains. Their tombs, side by side, mark the end of a love that outlasted crowns and empires.
Those who study her life describe her as a woman shaped by her era, the Romantic Age. In private, she was gentle and perceptive, devoted to family and art. Her marriage, unlike so many royal unions, was one of genuine affection. Nicholas called her "my little bird," admiring her lightness of step and spirit. And through her portraits, one can still glimpse that grace, a reflection of a woman whose love story endured, even as history moved mercilessly on.
In matters of state, Alexandra remained untouched by the shifting tides of her century. Politics, progress, and the rumblings of reform passed beyond her understanding. Her world was private and emotional, not public or political. Nicholas, her husband, ruled as an absolute monarch, unyielding in faith and power, But in doing so, he let slip a moment when history might have turned toward renewal rather than repression. Yet, for all their blindness to the forces reshaping the world around them, the story of Nicholas and Alexandra endures not as one of politics, but of love. It is the tale of two souls, bound completely to one another, an emperor and his empress, who, despite the weight of empire and tragedy, found in each other a devotion that even time could not erase.